supervisor is on the phone. I'm sure one of his colleagues will take a picture of Commissioner DeBunda having eagled himself out for this weekend's game, so that he can appreciate the aesthetics of the room today.
Well, at my age, this might be my last opportunity.
No.
And as a New England fan, I'm sure I'm still going to see many more.
And your family slows off.
Secretary Redding has been called to a cabinet meeting this afternoon, so you are stuck with me. Cheryl Cook, Deputy Secretary for Marketing. The meeting having been properly sunshined, we'll get going here, starting with the minutes, which for those of you with the binders are behind tab 2. Everybody's had a chance to...
I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Second. Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Minutes are approved. All right. Let me ask Tracy Stockwell to come on up, and we'll do the financial report as of December 31st.
Good afternoon, Deputy Secretary and Commissioners. Starting out with the Basement Fund financial statement. Remaining cash balance was $7 million. Revenue of $1.5 million. Expenditures of $2.2 million, leaving an ending cash balance of $6.3 million. The Commission financial statements. We had revenue of $865,000, operating expenditures of $208,000, with personnel added in, total expenditures were $785,000. For testing, total revenue was $653,000, operating expenditures were $834,000, with personnel expenditures added in, it's $1.4 million. Promotion, we had expenditures of $87,000 for the month of December. Fair administration.
Tracy, can we go back 1 second?
Sure can.
Go back to the commission just for a second, okay? I just want to make sure that the expenditures for to date, that includes that 6 months, is that correct?
Correct.
Is 3.4 million, right?
Correct.
The budget was 8.4 million.
Yes.
Is there anything are we running ahead of budget, or is there something that's not included in that first 6 months that we should be able to?
I think what you're looking at there again is probably over budgeting in personnel dollars, because of it's just the way we happen to do it. We didn't really alter the personnel dollars, not knowing whether we were going to be doing the evaluation time studies and such. So it's probably mostly overstated in your personnel dollars. And again, it could be overstated in the operating. I think if you look back to the comparative, that helps you see where you really are in line with testing and commission expenditures, and comparatively you're right on as compared to last year. So it could be that again the budget's not. Again, remember that budget establishes spending authority, so you want to allow enough room in case something unexpected happens in the promotion.
But if the trend continues, we should have the excess at the end of the year.
Yes.
Commission.
Yes.
Thank you.
Again, though, remember that you have to look at the overall cash balance in the front, because you are having those promotional dollars now, so the balance will not be as large as last year. But you should, yeah, we should be fine with an excess.
Thank you.
Fair administration, I can assure you my staff is finally going in. There was a little bit of miscommunication, and this is actually the 2016 expenditure that hit 2017. They had zeroed out the 2017, but when I looked at it farther, 2016 payroll expenditure will be gone next month. And then the charges for fair administration will be done hitting commission. And then referring to the comparative financial statements, you can see both personnel and operating. I mean, I don't think we get much closer than that. So I think it's real comparative now. We're looking at being able to trend the expenditures for the testing and the commission together with the clean accounting. And then following that of the 3 restricted fund accounts statements.
I also just want to tell the rest of the commission that I had a conference call this past month with Tracy and Tom and about some of the allocations that we had put off for a couple months, and I was satisfied at the end of that conversation that I totally understood what was going on. The only surprise was one that I asked you to bring up, which about Ashley's salary and where it's paid from. I've already informed the commission in executive session about that, so I don't have to do that. But that was the only surprise to me, that that allocation was not what I thought it was. But I do thank you for that opportunity.
Is everybody else okay with the explanation of the salary of promotional dollars?
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Any questions, comments, anything not computing? All right, hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ask for a motion to approve the financial statements. Thank you, commissioners. Or second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, well, moving on to the NTRA presentation, and Steve Cook, come on.
Yeah, so, good afternoon. Thanks for having me here today. The NTRA is very happy to be here to reinforce our message that is the Safety and Integrity Alliance. And my comments for you today would be sort of a why, how, who, what of description of the Safety and Integrity Alliance. And I hope that all of us can leave this presentation today with kind of an improved awareness of what is the Safety and Integrity Alliance, what we are accomplishing, and frankly, how you might help us achieve this very important mission at your own racetracks. So I always like to begin with, why did the Alliance form? And if you think back to the mid-2000s, hopefully racing it was probably a very low point. You know, that's the era when Barbaro breaks down in the 2006 Preakness. I think it's 2008, 8 bells, second in the Kentucky Derby, and catastrophically injured and euthanized right on the racetrack for millions of fans and customers to see. This is the same time when Big Brown openly discusses his regular legal rotations of anabolic steroids. So the horse racing industry is making the newspapers, all the national newspapers, for all the wrong reasons at this time. This is even a period when Congress comes knocking on the industry's door and asks some pretty hard questions, and the industry is just not organized to answer these questions, and in some cases we don't have very good answers. So by 2009, the Safety and Integrity Alliance is in full gear, along with a host of other very important industry initiatives. And the point is that the industry needed to show our stakeholders, we needed to show our public, we needed to show our government that horse racing really could reform itself. So our mission statement, crafted at that time and standing today: the health and safety of our human and equine athletes and the integrity of our sport are horse racing's top priorities. So our industry today spends a lot of time discussing how to pursue and obtain regulatory uniformity across what effectively are a vast and numerous racing jurisdictions across North America. And as this discussion rumbles on, I always take the opportunity to point out that the Alliance is one initiative out there actually achieving actual wins towards this goal. So the Alliance is promoting national, uniform, high standards for safety and integrity that are secretly adopted at racetracks in that pursuit of what we would call an accredited racetrack. Application for accreditation would reoccur every 2 years. At the participate in tracks, and to be accredited, it means that a racetrack has meaningfully achieved what we call the code of standards. And of course, if a racetrack is not meaningfully achieving that code of standards, then of course they can lose their accredited status. So let me tell you about the code of standards that we've adopted. It's an annually updated document. It's based on previous year submissions from individuals, industry stakeholders. We can collect numerous very important ideas as the Alliance team travels across the nation. And the process is very heavily influenced by the Racing Commissioners International Model Rules process. The updates to the Code of Standards each year is not a unilateral move. It must be approved by an industry advisory board. This advisory board is very carefully constructed to include a cross-section of industry stakeholders or industry stakeholder bodies for delegates. So, for example, of course, there's representatives on there from the NTRA. It's very important that the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium is included. The horsemen are represented through a delegate from the THA and the HBPA. Horse owners are represented through groups such as Thoroughbred. Performing at what we would call sub-accreditation standards. That has been, in numerous circumstances, a very powerful and very provocative change agent towards the betterment of one's racing. And that evidence that I talk about would be in the form of what we call an accreditation report. And this report, typically a 50 to 60 page document, that is where we pin our observations and our recommendations, and we grade the applicant racetrack against the Code of Standards based on what we've seen through the application for accreditation process and what we see at our on-site visits and follow-up visits to the applicant racetrack. It's important, I think, always to note here that racetrack management alone is not who achieves the successful accreditation process through the Safety and Integrity Alliance. Successful accreditation is always the culmination of true buy-in and real participation from all of the local stakeholders, including racetrack management, but it's very important that the horsemen have buy-in and are on board, the local jockey colony, the local veterinarians, owners, but very, very importantly, the local racing commission. Easily 40% or more of the Code of Standards relies on the good hard work of the Racing Commission. So today the Safety and Integrity Alliance has 23 fully accredited racetracks. They account for 90% of graded stakes races, 96% of Grade 1 races, 75% of North American wagering comes from NTRA Safety and Integrity accredited racetrack. And there are several tracks that have not yet made it onto our map of accredited racetracks, but they're working very, very diligently in that direction with our assistance. And to me, I always like to point out that those racetracks, while it is a discrete observation, it still is a very concrete example of the Alliance being a change agent for the betterment of our racing. Now, one question that has vexed us at the NTRA and at the Alliance since its formation in 2009, with the obvious successes that we are having through the process at racetracks, how is it that we persuade more hesitant operators to join us? How do we ensure that 100% of North America's racetracks are operating correctly to that industry-constructed code of standards? And an interesting step forward that we saw in this area in 2016 and 17, we're working on it very diligently in 2018, is that the West Virginia Racing Commission saw fit to call upon their thoroughbred racetracks to join the Alliance. And so what's happened partly as a result of that is that we are enjoying a very positive, successful working relationship with those two West Virginia tracks, that's Charlestown and Mountaineer, and also working with their stakeholders. So one of the most important messages that I ask you commissioners to take away today is that pay attention to this process that is in motion in West Virginia, and please do call on the Alliance if you can see ways that we can work this similar opportunity in your own jurisdiction.
Excuse me, Steve, would you explain called upon then? Was that order? Was it, what do you mean by they called upon?
I would describe it as they mandated that the racetrack achieve accreditation.
That's what I thought you meant, but you use kinder words.
Yes, sir. Fine. Thanks for clarifying. So, outside of West Virginia's motion, it's long been observed for the Alliance, there's no entity forcing racetracks to participate with the Code of Standards and the accreditation process. So I like to assure everyone there really are very good reasons for everyone to participate in the Alliance. And these are things that I experienced in my history. I was Vice President of Racing at Woodbine Racetrack, and these are things that came to matter for us in the very complicated jurisdiction of Toronto. That accreditation seal for your accredited racetrack, that is assuring your stakeholders that your track, your horsemen are doing things correctly. You will tend to refer to it when you're answering customer questions, customer complaints. You're going to use it as a selling point to your clients, your horse racing customers. You're going to refer to it when whoever it may be, say the management, a regulator, the jockeys, a horseman's group, someone might present alternate viewpoints on an issue, and you may refer to that code of standards and that accredited status. And from time to time, public media or trade media is going to rightfully ask some very hard questions, and you're going to refer to it then. And frankly, the accredited tracks frequently will refer those calls to me at the Alliance to help them communicate that message and show what they've been doing so far. Accreditation provides measurability. You probably are already achieving certain standards of safety and integrity, but the trick is according to whom. And in those cases, that seal of accreditation certainly sums up the message in something much more efficient than thousands of words. The very process of accreditation itself does continually improve operations of a participating racetrack. That application process, that site inspection process, that is a reinforced opportunity for self-review. It helps you, the operator, self-identify what's up to speed at the racetrack and maybe some things that have lapsed that you thought were up to speed. And then very, very importantly, what happens through the accreditation process is the team that we bring with us on the road to visit these racetracks on a recurring basis, the team that we've assembled are a group of people that collectively actually have seen it all. And I guess my point there is I do guarantee all of us can learn something from each other. And that's the point of bringing that team of experts with us for this third-party review. So in that vein, most recent examples of the Alliance being a really critical go-to resource for individual operators where they were trying to shore up things like infectious disease protocols. In fact, that would probably be a very hot issue right now as we're seeing more EHV1 positives pop up across the nation. Test barn and chain of custody procedures, official testing laboratory standards, some very important in-today race day integrity protocols, unofficial veterinary procedures. My point with that is that the Alliance, with these one-on-one efforts, it's not that we are making lots of headlines with these one-on-one contributions, but what we're doing is we absolutely, I can say unequivocally, we absolutely are helping to prevent that next tragic or negative headline. And then the final point I always make when asked is that accredited tracks are placed in some very good company. If we went down the list of those 23 accredited racetracks today, I think all in this room could agree it is a who's who's list of horse racing in North America. But here's what happens when you're not on that list, and I've seen this happen. Those that are absent from the list, what it causes is that your stakeholders and your critics will frequently ask, why not? And we refer to this as conspicuous by your absence. And you will experience this from time to time. There's a very helpful synopsis of what is the Alliance, how we operate, what it is we're trying to achieve. It was printed in the December 22nd, 2015 Thoroughbred Daily News. I think each commissioner may have that in your minutes package today. The rest of those us in this room, that article has been posted at ntraalliance.com. It is a probably better summary than what I've provided today on what we do with the Alliance. I urge everybody to take a look at that, take a look at the Code of Standards, and you should have a very good idea of what it is we're trying to achieve. If anybody can't find it on the internet, contact me at the Alliance and I'm going to get it to you. So, for my part, I'm very proud to be at the NTRA. I'm very proud of our part as a positive change agent for the industry that we all very much love deeply. And I thank this commission for sharing your time with us today and allowing this opportunity to spread the important message that is the Safety and Integrity Alliance. Our mission is to assist every racetrack achieve the Code of Standards, and to that end, I am eager to take anyone's call at any time that we can be of value there. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any questions?
Yes. Steve, thank you for coming out. And proud to point out that all of our horsemen's organizations are supporters of the NTRA, so we're proud of the work that you do. Just a couple questions. How long does the process normally take from start to beginning to get accreditation?
That really depends on the operator, where you are at the start. There are tracks that, I have plenty of racetracks that are very aware of the full contents of the Code of Standards, and they have spent weeks and months getting themselves to a point where they're ready to apply for accreditation. You got to remember that is an open book test, so you're going to tend not to take the test if you're not going to pass. So I'm very proud of just the existence of the Code of Standards drives progress, because there are operators out there that have spent much time working towards that standard. Now, once you have arrived to the point where you're ready to submit your application for accreditation, which is no easy process, to answer how long it takes, it depends on what we find in that application and what we find when we make it to the racetrack. So I don't have a firm answer for that. I can tell that, I can say that in West Virginia, they made that mandate that we referenced 2 summers ago, and we're still working very hard with them.
Is there besides the manpower to get prepared, is there an actual filing fee or cost associated with this?
Yes, sir. So each of the we're in Pennsylvania. Each of the Pennsylvania racetracks would be a $15,000 charge.
What do you believe are the bottlenecks that stop people from becoming accredited, except the concern that they can't pass the test? Are there any other bottlenecks?
You know, I don't think in our business, we have a lot of passionate people. We have a industry that really does love the horse, does love horse racing. I don't think anybody's opposed to the words safety and integrity. So I don't think there's a lot of that up there. There can be some provincial attitudes where, don't tell me how to run my track, young man. And there can be concerns that are we handing some sort of control or power to a third-party group who we don't know and haven't engaged with before. So I think there can be some hesitation in those areas. I am confident, though, once we, in all cases, when we have been able to engage with an operator and show them what we can do and what we do know, that it tends to break down those barriers, but we just need to get our toe in the door first.
But as you said, we're in Pennsylvania. What is the status of the tracks in Pennsylvania with respect to this program?
Parks has an active application for accreditation in front of us, and we are working on that as we speak. And the other two racetracks, we are still waiting to get started.
Has there been any discussions with the other two tracks about possibly coming into the program?
Not with myself, no, sir.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. And I seem to remember a number of years ago at Parks, we had a presentation. It may have been your predecessor, Mike, who spoke to us. There was interest at the time expressed by the track of pursuing that. And I think the commission, Mr. Ellis, were you on the commission at that time? We were looking towards the track is taking the initiative to doing this as opposed to the commission mandating it. But here we are a number of years down the line. And maybe it's time for this commission to do something like West Virginia and I hate to use the word mandate it, but request, require, call on our tracks to pursue accreditation.
Yeah, so to clarify my answer to your last question, I should point out, so I have been the executive director of the Safety Integrity Alliance for 3 years now, getting close to 4, and my predecessor, Mike Ziegler, very likely would have engaged with some of the Pennsylvania racetracks, but I don't know when that was. On the concept of looking at the West Virginia route, I would urge the commission to first review very carefully the Code of Standards as it is today, because a very sizable chunk of that document calls on operations, protocols, and rules to be in place from your side. So there's a decent amount of lifting that you're going to want to be very aware of. At that point, I would, of course, recommend next steps.
I'm sure we can find out, but just for our edification, when you say mandate, what was the consequence and what time frame did West Virginia put in for the program? What was the consequence if you didn't do it, and what kind of time frame was set in order to accomplish it?
I don't know that there's a hard deadline on accomplishing, because I think there was still a little bit of question just what kind of door was being opened there. What they did was lay deadlines on when the racetracks must apply. And those racetracks met that deadline. I don't remember how long it was, a few months, and because the application process is not simple. And they did, both those racetracks did meet the application deadline in the spring of this year, in the spring of last year, 2017. We did attend both racetracks and submit extensive reports and consultation on things that we needed to work on. And in a couple cases, in both racetrack cases, I know they're working very hard on our recommendations.
So when I asked earlier about bottlenecks, you hinted a couple of times that the process itself may be a bottleneck. It's very complicated.
That Code of Standards is not a simple document.
Okay. So you're suggesting that if we do our help, we should basically consider the fact that it's a difficult process, and because I'm concerned about they may meet the deadline to file, but then it may take them years to become certified, and I just wonder whether that really accomplishes anything except.
If you would go down that road, you'd probably want to allow some basis of deadline, reporting deadlines, perhaps. And there may be a process between the Alliance and the racetracks where we can meet with the commission and give status updates and have realistic discussions on where we are and where we're headed.
We may have an advantage. We have an experienced bureau director who worked with the Maryland tracks, correct? You want to comment at all?
I have some familiarity with your predecessor, Mike Ziegler. Both at Laurel and Pimlico, when I was there as president, we were accredited twice. So your comment, it's a couple points I would make. First off, it is a stringent process, but a lot of what is in place at a lot of these racetracks fall within your standards. The second thing, and it's probably key, it's not just the racetracks. It's very important to understand, for this to get legs and move forward, the horsemen have a big part in this. The commission has a major undertaking. And the only way this is going to fly is if all the groups work together, and it's really the ultimate goal. If the goal is to get accredited, you'll get accredited. It can be done within, I'm going to suggest, 6 months if you really wanted to. That's just my personal opinion.
I hesitate to put timelines on it because I just don't know what is the current situation in Pennsylvania. But all of your other comments, I would absolutely second.
So it strikes me that I don't know what I don't know about the difference between the standards you've been talking about and the Commission's current rule set. Perhaps we could do some kind of a...
Mr. Jennings, it was confusing to me as I'm looking at the code of standards I have. It says injury reporting and prevention, and that seems to probably take place at these tracks. Safer racing and training environment, I think we could meet that standard. Uniform medication and testing, well, they're part of, Pennsylvania is part of the uniform medication, so that would apply. Jockey health and welfare, I think we do provide for that. I know we do at parks. I think they also do under the state law, actually, at the national and the Prescott. All of them have a retired racehorse aftercare, and they all, I'm certain they have wagering security. So it seems to me they meet the standards, it's just a matter of proving it to you. So I don't see how...
I don't mean to disagree with you. I would concur with you, Commissioner DeBunda, there are standards in place at all these racetracks. But the standards that are set by the NTRA and the accreditation, even the best racetracks are going to have to take it up a notch. In other words, I can go back to the days of Laurel and Pimlico, where we felt we were in pretty good shape, but there was in cases that we were at a level 2, let's say, and we had to go up to a level 1. That's what you're going to find here. That there's no dispute that these racetracks have programs in place. I'm not sold without taking a hard look, and I haven't looked in a while, that they meet the standards of the accreditation. They're pretty stringent.
I think the path forward for today then is to do what you started to do on the spot, which is to compare where we are to where we need to be for the Commission's work, identify where those gaps are, and what our strategy would be to.
Well, I would ask that if we can, for the next meeting, have the Bureau directors and staff come back with a recommendation on whether or not we should get involved, and if so, how, and what would be required on our part. I'd like to have that report for the next meeting so we can consider that.
I see heads nodding. Is there consensus on? I don't see need to take a vote on something like that. Staff, instruction clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Appreciate it. I guess staying in the same vein, right? The Interstate Anti-Doping and Drug Testing Standards Compact. We have Ellen Foreman and Russell Williams. Two separate? Oh, okay. We'll start with Mr. Foreman. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Thank you for inviting me. Nice to see old friends. I'm here to discuss with you the proposed interstate anti-doping standards. I'm sorry. Unusual for me not to be heard.
And Al, you should state your position.
I'm sorry, Alan Foreman. I'm among many hats that I wear in the industry. I'm chairman of the Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association.
And Al, I want to interject for one moment, just so everybody understands. The Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association is a member of the THA. As the president of that, I am a member of the board of the THA. I also was lucky enough to be elected a vice president of the THA. So I wanted to disclose that all to the commission. We're not voting on anything to do with the THA today. We're talking about something that the THA is a part of, but not specifically the THA. So I don't see a conflict because I don't think we're voting on anything today, but I wanted to at least disclose that relationship that I have and that my organization has to the THA.
And if I could digress for just 1 second, I'm a member of the NTRA board. I'm a member of the board of the Safety and Integrity Alliance. There is nothing more important to any of us, horsemen, track owners, anyone involved in the industry, commissioners, and the health, safety, and welfare of the horse. It's our primary responsibility. The Safety and Integrity Alliance was established just for that purpose, to try to bring order to an industry that was somewhat disorganized with respect to its handling of health, safety, and welfare matters. And I think that the Pennsylvania Tracks Bar are very conspicuous by their absence. If you look at the list of tracks that are and have been accredited, have submitted to it, it's a rigorous program. It's not difficult, it's rigorous, and it should be rigorous. And I think that the Pennsylvania Tracks can meet that standard. I have no doubt in my mind, I know the Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association has supported financially and with our time and effort the Alliance and the accreditation of our racetracks. And I know the HBPA similarly supports the Safety and Integrity Alliance. It's just a matter of doing it. And I really urge you and the support that you can give to the tracks, encourage them to get the Pennsylvania Tracks accredited. It has been a very, very positive step for the industry and one that we very much value. Would you want to be treated at a hospital that was not accredited? Would you want to send your children to universities that are not accredited? Think about it. And so when you compare accredited to non-accredited, it just rings right off the bat. There's something not right about an organization or a group or a company that's not accredited. So I'm just happy to be here today with the discussion. So I apologize if I'm weighing in on something I don't belong in, but I would encourage you to do it. With respect to the compact, I was asked to come up to discuss the compact with you. It is something that the commissions in the region and the horsemen have been discussing probably since June, when I organized the commission representatives to discuss the possibility of a compact. I've had the privilege for the past more than 15 years, probably 20 years, going back to when Ben Nolt was your executive director. I know George has been with the commission for a long time. Joe Michalko. I've been facilitating meetings of regulators in the Mid-Atlantic with horsemen for about 15 or 20 years. The Mid-Atlantic region is the largest concentration of racing on a daily basis in the United States. We can have at any one time during the year 18 racetracks in the region operating at one time. We have horsemen who not only race in Pennsylvania, who are Pennsylvania residents, or race at Parks or at Penn or at Prescott, who are racing at other tracks in the region, many on the same day, subject to state-controlled, state-regulated industries that abide by rules and regulations. And for the horsemen, it's going from one state to another and complying with the rules in each of those jurisdictions. It's obviously a very common and very hot topic in the industry and has been for a long time. But one of the things that I think is so great about the Mid-Atlantic is that we've pledged to work together collectively in as best a uniform manner as possible for the best interest not only of our horses, but for our horsemen and our fans. And through the regional efforts, we've been able to do that. 5 years ago, through the cooperation of the regional racing commissions, the commissions in the region, the horsemen's groups, the American Association of Equine Practitioners, and national groups, we developed the Mid-Atlantic Mid-Atlantic Medication and Drug Testing Program. It was a model uniform medication program that we pledged every commission in the region signed on to for a uniform medication program that now is the National Uniform Medication Program. In 5 years, it is creating a sea change in the way that medication is regulated in our industry. We've done 4 things in that program. We created 2 baskets, for lack of a better term, of medications. The one basket were medications that were identified by the veterinary community and national and international experts, not people like me who wear suits, but the experts, on what medications are necessary for the health and welfare and daily management of the horse, and for which we want to encourage our horsemen to use those medications and veterinarians to use those medications, that we would set uniform testing thresholds for those substances, assign a penalty category for them, and give guidance to the horsemen on how to treat their horses. That became the controlled therapeutic list. The second was a requirement that all of our laboratories become accredited. We're talking about our racetracks becoming accredited, but there was a desire in this industry for not only international accreditation under what's called ISO 17025, but also the RMTC Code of Accreditation, which is much stricter than international accreditation, and for which we were going to require all of our laboratories to participate in. The third was that the administration of Lasix to horses would be under tightly controlled circumstances, and the administration of Lasix would be by third parties under the supervision of our racing commissions. And the fourth prong of that program was a multiple violation penalty system to identify horsemen who are frequent and habitual violators of our medication rules, assigning points just as we do in the traffic court system for medication violations. And for those who are multiple violators, they would face additional penalties and suspensions until they became what we call good citizens of our industry. In the 4 years, actually, since we adopted the program, all of the commissions, all of the states in the Mid-Atlantic region have adopted all 4 prongs of the program. You can read all you want about other groups in the industry who suggest that uniformity isn't happening and Pennsylvania isn't doing what everybody else is doing. Pennsylvania, just like Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia, New York, New Jersey, have adopted all 4 prongs of the program. And it's happening across the country. And a very good example of not only what this program has done, but what the NTRA's Safety and Accreditation Program has done, Safety and Integrity Program, is that 5 years ago, not a single laboratory in our industry was accredited to the RMTC code, something that we started in 2009 after a presentation I gave at the Jockey Club Roundtable. We created a group to create that code. We created a code, but the states weren't adopting the code. And until we made it a requirement in the Mid-Atlantic for our laboratories, it wasn't happening. So the Mid-Atlantic commits to do it. Our laboratories all get accredited, and now we had 18 laboratories doing drug testing in the industry 5 years ago. We've consolidated down to a much smaller number. I believe it's 11 or 12. But the fact of the matter is that we were down to, going into this year, 2 laboratories doing drug testing for racing in the United States that are not accredited. One of them will be accredited this summer because through the Alliance Code, if they weren't compliant by January 1, 2019, the tracks were going to lose their accreditation. The tracks didn't lose their accreditation. And the last jurisdiction, Louisiana, which is a Churchill track, fairgrounds, is now applying for and will be going through the accreditation process. And sometime next year, they will become accredited. So we've got all of our laboratories accredited in the last 5 years. That's an amazing accomplishment for this industry. You don't need the federal government to come in and help you do that. We did it ourselves because it was the right thing to do. And we're doing it with each prong. I think 93% of the handle in the United States is governed by jurisdictions that have adopted the controlled therapeutic substance provisions. California just started third-party license administration. We're down to just a handful of jurisdictions that are not yet doing it. And it's been slow, but the multiple violation penalty program is being adopted. But the good news there is, as we do when we have our Mid-Atlantic meetings in March, the number of positive tests are coming down through the program, and the number of doping violations we see, you can count on 2 hands. So that is a pretext to the compact. The question has always been, well, you're talking about uniformity, but you know, when we want to adopt a uniform rule in the Mid-Atlantic or elsewhere, you have your state adoption requirements. So West Virginia has to go to their legislature. While we're adopting, they got to wait a year because they have to go to the legislature. Maryland adopts through a state system, which may take 4 or 5 months. Pennsylvania can adopt by reference, but you have your system. Delaware, we're all doing it at different times. So when we tell the horsemen we're adopting a rule and they go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, it isn't always the case. And so to simplify and streamline the process, not only with respect to the uniform adoption of rules, but their implementation, a suggestion was made about establishing a compact. The industry talked about a compact probably 6 or 7 years ago, a much larger compact idea. There wasn't a lot of buy-in because of concerns about how rules would be developed, who would be on the committees that would develop the rules, who would make the rules. Was it an attempt to disenfranchise state racing commissions or horsemen's groups or give more power to other groups in the industry? It didn't fly. I was approached back in May about getting the Mid-Atlantic regulators together just to have a conversation about whether or not we might be interested in doing a compact just limited to medication rules and standards and drug testing standards. Because that's something we're already doing. It's just the implementation part of it. So we consulted with the national experts on compacts. The expert is a gentleman by the name of Rick Masters, who is counsel to the Council of State Governments and he's special counsel on interstate compacts. He's the national guru on compacts. And working with Rick and with Rick Goodell, counsel to the New York Gaming Commission, who's been involved in compacts, we drafted model compact language. The first step was we got all the groups, all the representatives of the commissions together. Tom was a part of that process. And we just, before we even talked to the horsemen or anyone else, do you like the idea of a compact? Do you want us to move forward? And the answer was unanimously, yes, let's move forward. And so we moved to the drafting stage. And then we provided to everyone the model language for a compact. We need to understand what a compact is. A compact requires legislative approval in each state that's going to participate in the compact. You can't do it by commission. It requires a statute. A compact is a contract between states. And so because it's a contract between states, because you agreed to act together and uniformly, the language has to be virtually identical. You can't do it your way. Maryland does it its way, New York does it its way. And the one controversial aspect of a compact is whether a state has the ability to opt out. If the compact moves to adopt a rule, and Pennsylvania says, well, we don't like that rule, we're going to opt out of the compact adopting that rule. We were told by the experts that if you adopt an opt-out provision, which was quite frankly part of the old compact, that you effectively don't have a compact, it's just an advisory compact. So if you're serious about doing a compact and you want it to be enforceable, you cannot have an opt-out provision. Now, I don't want to get into the debate between the jurisdictions. It's tough to get everybody moving in one direction, but the compromise to an opt-out, and it does work very well, was a provision that's in the language that you have, which provides that in order for the compact to propose a model rule and to adopt it, it requires an 80% supermajority vote. So if there is dissension within the jurisdictions about the adoption of a rule, it's not going to get adopted. And the way the compact would be set up, if there is dissension, it gets bounced back to the groups that develop the rule to refine the rule, reconsider the rule, and then bring it back. It essentially is going to require the kind of consensus that we're now doing. And the way the compact would be set up, if Pennsylvania joins the compact, Pennsylvania would designate amongst yourselves one person who would be Pennsylvania's designee to the compact. And that person would vote for Pennsylvania. And each state that joins the compact would designate one individual who would vote for that state's racing commission at the compact level. And the way, theoretically, that a compact would work, and it's not in, the details are not in, this is the statutory language, this is what's required, and right now, your surrounding states are all in the process of introducing this legislation in their legislative sessions. I'm involved in it in Maryland. New York is going through its required budget process right now, and will take up this legislation after the budget is approved. Delaware, New Jersey, West Virginia are all moving for the introduction in their 2018 legislative sessions of the identical language. And as the compact will not form until there is a nucleus of states that are able to create an effective compact. Now, theoretically, how the compact would work and what made it comfortable for the THA horsemen, among others, is that Currently, with the development of anti-doping and drug testing standards rules right now, there is a very extensive development and vetting process through not only coming out of our states, but through the RMTC. And when the RMTC makes a recommendation to RCI, RCI takes a second look, does its own vetting, and before a model rule is adopted by RCI, it has been, again, sufficiently vetted by all industry groups, commissions, horsemen's organizations, stakeholder organizations. So, assuming that there is a rule that is adopted by RCI that is something that would certainly benefit the entire region, what would happen is the compact would then meet, propose the rule, publish the rule, give public notice and get comment back, receive that feedback, then call a meeting to take final action on the rule and either send it back for further consideration, or if there is consensus to adopt the rule, establish an implementation date that for all the participating states in the compact, it becomes effective on that date. So for West Virginia, it clearly moves up the process, but for all of us, it has one single implementation date for everyone when that rule would become effective. So that's how it would work. It's totally designed for purposes of regional consensus and national consensus, ultimately, and streamlined implementation. It is not designed to create some new body that's going to come up with crazy rules that's going to impose on people that don't have a lot of support and don't work in our best interest. It's just moving the process forward from what we're doing. And one last comment, and that's with respect to the standardbred industry, because this started through thoroughbred interests, and we've been meeting with the commissions, and there's been this dynamic over the past several years about the standardbred industry concerned about rules that are being adopted, whether by RMTC or otherwise, that are not in the standardbred industry's best interest, and that somehow this is going to be an effort to superimpose the thoroughbred industry's rules on the standardbred industry. There's no such conversation, there's no such intention whatsoever, and in fact, within the compact, once the compact is established, the compact can establish procedures that would allow the thoroughbred industry to adopt rules for the thoroughbred industry, and for standardbred interests to adopt rules that are in the standardbred industry's interest, because they may not always converge. I will confess that I was one who, through RMTC, thought that there needed to be one set of rules for everyone, and I've had a change in that regard. I'm not convinced that it's necessary in every instance, and I recognize that there are instances where the standardbred industry might require different rules.
Would you have a different representative for the
You can't do that, because the compact requires one representative from each state, so it would be the responsibility of the representative from Pennsylvania, for example, to represent the interests of both the standardbred industry and the thoroughbred industry. It's somewhat problematic, because in a state like Maryland, Maryland Racing Commission mandates one set of rules for both standardbred and thoroughbred. They all operate under the same rules. Delaware has separate commissions, and they operate under separate rules. New Jersey has a thoroughbred and a standardbred industry, but they have, I believe, one set of rules. New York recognizes, and has said with respect to the compact, we see this as a thoroughbred compact. If there's a way for the standardbred industry to be accommodated, we would approve that. So I think that the compact can, this shouldn't be a threat to anyone. This is meant to not only be in the best interest of the industry, but also to make it a lot easier for horsemen to comply with rules and to be able to do so as they go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I would hope, I understand the standardbred industry has concerns. There's nothing in the proposed compact that should be a threat to anyone, and I believe that through the compact, which, quite frankly, it's not something for me to set up, it's going to be for the commissions to set up, there will be a process set up to accommodate both. So I'm merely here because I helped to organize it. I'm helping to get it done in all the respective states. All of the commissions have agreed to do it. They've agreed to submit the legislation. They've talked to their governors. We've had clearance from a number of governors. And The process now moves forward in the legislative arena, and I'm hoping by July 1 that there will be a nucleus to form the compact. And this compact, by the way, is not limited to the Mid-Atlantic, and there are jurisdictions outside the Mid-Atlantic that want to join the compact. If they pass the legislation, they would have the ability to do so.
What's your nucleus you said you want to get to? What's the number that you're looking for?
Well, the nucleus that I'm looking at is the Mid-Atlantic, the same people who we meet with every year, and we'll meet again in March. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia. And they've all voted to move forward.
Other questions?
Yeah, Alan, tell me how you feel about the other movement, the anti-doping movement that's going on in the country, and how does that relate to what you're trying to do here?
Well, I'm an opponent of the federal legislation. I don't believe that we want the federal government in our business, and I've always felt that way. I believe that the current federal legislation disenfranchises the horsemen's organizations and is intended to do so. I think that the current legislation disenfranchises the state racing commissions and is intended to do so, and probably RCI, the existing process, and places it in the hands of a group of individuals who will be doing essentially the same thing you're doing, but they're going to have the authority to make the rules, and they're certainly in the disciplinary arena. We're going to be in a federal system. We're going to be in an arbitration system, potentially. And what I've always thought this legislation about, quite frankly, is not about the regulation of the sport, but about the elimination of race day medication. The previous bill, this is a newer version which specifically says so, but we believe that the previous legislation was nothing more than a stalking horse for a group to eliminate race day medication, because the current system is not doing that. And in the current bill, there is what's called the Strone Act provision, which specifically eliminates the use of race day medication under the legislation. I think it was January 1, 2019. They're going to have to get moving past the legislation and get all these horses off of Lasix by January 1, 2019. So I don't think the bill is in the best interest of the industry, quite frankly. And so, but I'm not laser focused on it, because we are doing what I have always said was a sea change in the way that we're dealing with the health, welfare, and integrity of our sport. We're continuing to move forward. I mean, we're irrespective of what they're doing in Washington, we're moving forward. This is another step in that process. By the way, the legislation provides that the legislation is not necessary if a compact is formed, and I think it's 75% of the major jurisdictions are in the compact. This compact is not designed to get rid of the federal legislation. That effort's going to be ongoing, I think, for some time. We're just going to move forward to do what's best for what I think is the industry, and that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, and we continue to do so, regardless of who's doing it.
Other questions?
Alan, I just want to follow up. As you know, I am in support of it as a thoroughbred horseman, but I'm a commissioner for all the breeds, and I am concerned about my standardbred brethren and their concerns about how this will work for them. So I would ask if they have any questions, that they should ask you those questions if you may. Number two is, I am concerned about going to the legislature unless we can do it in some method that we've talked about, because of the mischief that can be applied. If we go in there, they may decide, okay, we'll give you this, but we're also going to do some other things. So I am concerned about that too. I was wondering what your comments would be about both of those. And then I would, if you don't mind, Madam Chairman, I would ask that we ask if the standardbred people have any questions, or even the thoroughbred people have any questions, while we have Alan here, because I think it's important to have their input.
I know Russell's going to speak, and Russell and I have spoken, so there's no better spokesman for the standardbred industry than Russell. But with respect to your concerns about going to the legislature, we all have those concerns. I mean, we went to the legislature last year to try to get a piece of legislation passed, and we were hit with a piece of legislation that would have diverted all of the costs of the Maryland Racing Commission to the purse dedication account, which is the slot revenues that we receive in Maryland. And that could have had serious implications for the 10-year agreement that we have with the Strana Group, the breeders, and the horsemen that has been the foundation for the rebuilding of the Maryland racing industry. So it's a matter of, number one, priorities, number one, number two, being able to get a piece of legislation done without having to open it up for other interests. That's not something I can address here in Pennsylvania. That's something for you all. I would hope that you could find a way to do it, because I think that participating in this compact, very important to Pennsylvania Racing Commission and to the racing interests, particularly given a lot of the criticism that you've been getting in the past year or so with respect to rulemaking and otherwise.
Do we have any questions from the Standardbred people?
I just hear from Mr. Lindsay, real, very quickly.
We have someone on the phone, so you may want to come up and everything like that. Is that okay?
Yes, yes. Mr. Williams, know you're coming up next.
Kim Hankins, Executive Director of the Meadow Standardbred Owners Association. The biggest concern that I believe we have, and Russell will address this also, is the inherent difference between thoroughbred racing and harness racing, in that harness racing is built on trying to race once a week, and if not, once every 10 days to 2 weeks. Whereas with thoroughbreds, it's 3 weeks to 4 weeks or above. So a lot of the medication, I'm not saying a lot, but a few of the medication standards that are being proposed are strictly in the book there as thoroughbred. And that would be our major concern, as well as the Part 4, your compilation of penalties and how that's addressed. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't comment whether it's good or bad, but I'd like to have the opportunity to review it before we would put in a recommendation either way. But again, the biggest problem is how quickly we race and what medications could or couldn't be used. That's all I have.
Thanks, Ken. All right, why don't we ask Russell Williams to come up? Thank you, Mr. Foreman, don't go too far. Thank you. I'm sorry, Brian, did you?
I just had a question for Alan. Again, as Commissioner DeBlunda said, thinking the thoroughbred.
They can't hear you on the
Yeah,
phone.
for Commissioner Bretheiser's benefit, why don't you get to a mic?
Brian Sanfratello, Pennsylvania Horse Breeders. As Commissioner DeBlunda had said, we have a lot of dealing now with the standardbred side. So my question would be if Alan had said that there was one representative from each state. So to make the standardbred people a little bit more comfortable, can't there be 2 representatives from each state, one standardbred, one thoroughbred? I mean, just a suggestion. I mean, the compact says 1, but why can't it say 2?
Alan, you want to?
That's a question that would have to go back to each of the commissioners who participated in this. We'd have to go back and look at it from the standpoint, we'd have to go back to legal counsel and ask them whether or not that's doable. And then all the states that are now moving to do this legislation are all going to have to move to amend their legislation in order to accommodate that, which does set the process back. To me, that's why I have suggested the possibility. The compact itself has not been formed, and the procedures for proposal and adoption of rules is something that's going to be left to the compact itself. It's not in legislation, and that's why I suggested that we need to get the legislation on the books to allow it to even form. The fact that it passes doesn't have any implications other than the formation of the compact itself. And Pennsylvania has to join the compact. And if Pennsylvania's standardbred industry is not comfortable, I would think that the Pennsylvania Commission might not want to join the compact until there's a process in place that accommodates the standardbred industry as well as the thoroughbred industry. And you won't join until that's done. And I envision a process within the compact that allows for the proposal and adoption of rules for the thoroughbred industry, and if it's necessary to do it for standardbreds, to do it for standardbreds. Understand that if the standardbreds don't join the compact, you'll continue to do the rulemaking that you do currently for the standardbred industry. They're not bound by the compact, so whatever rules you do will go through the normal channels and through their adoption process, their implementation process. For those who join the compact, it's streamlined. So, you know,
And I appreciate, and I just want to point out to you, Alan, that you may not be aware of this, but in Pennsylvania, under our current legislation setting this up, we do have a separation on regulation for different breeds. On what regulations of those, the thoroughbred appointees do not vote on those matters, the standardbred appointees do, and vice versa. So we basically have a quorum of 7 when we vote on those matters rather than 9, because on certain matters related to those breeds, the horsemen's representatives, the thoroughbred horsemen, do not vote, and the same thing is true when it's the other way around. So I think there's a process here in Pennsylvania for dealing with similar kind of issues that do exist in Pennsylvania. So I just point that out to you.
Thank you. Why don't we turn the mic over to Mr. Williams, and please proceed.
Thank you. Russell Williams, I'm a director of the United States Trotting Association. I serve as its president, and I have the good fortune to be a resident of Pennsylvania as well. I'd like to start with the last point that we were discussing, because I have not seen the single delegate concept as being a problem. Alan was getting to what I think is the answer here. It's a contract among states and state commissions, and as someone who practiced law many years ago, the contract can be written to produce the desired outcome. You can have a governance provision in the contract that would allow the delegate to vote in one way for a standardbred issue and another way for a thoroughbred issue. It could be 14 days here, 7 days there. So I don't think that's a serious problem once you get into the mechanics of the compact itself. I would also say that I think that it is now, and it wasn't a few years ago, it's now recognized that the differing business models and racing models that thoroughbreds and standardbreds have are part of the thinking when we discuss things like this. So I don't see an atmosphere, a true atmosphere of suspicion or anything like that. It's just these things have to be out on the table and worked out. RMTC was an example a few years ago of tension between thoroughbred and standardbred business models. That has, to some extent, changed, but apart from the breed-specific problem, there is the science versus policy problem and the science work product problem. I'd like to comment on that because that's going to be important for anyone going forward with the compact. The USTA parted company with RMTC a few years back, and one of the reasons was that it appeared to us that they were getting into policy and actually regulatory decisions when we felt they should be strictly a source of science. The Commission needs to know what's the science on this. But the Commission does not have to then additionally be told, and here's what your policy should be. So this, I think, applies not just to RMTC, but any source of science, any studies that are used in making rules about medication. And when a pronouncement has been made by one of these sources of science, whether it's proffered by standardbreds or thoroughbreds, there needs to be a way to review it in a public forum. It may not have to be subjected to peer review, but if there's a problem perceived by the people who are going to be regulated, it should be possible to discuss it. Pennsylvania, in our view, really needs to be in the compact if possible. With regard to whether the act would be opened, I'd just like to offer, at one time I was in the Virginia Attorney General's office, the AG issues opinions on questions from members of state government. I do not know if Pennsylvania has a similar process, but I'd be surprised if it didn't. I think that question could be well worked out ahead of time before any danger was risked with regard to that. But the reason Pennsylvania should be in is Pennsylvania is one of the giants in racing and breeding in North America. I can make a case, and I've done so a couple of times, that it is the giant. And any interstate compact that did not include Pennsylvania would be the weaker for it. The reverse of that has some validity as well, because this is a contract that would have governance provisions that would be binding on the members of the compact. And if Pennsylvania were not a member, its influence on the other states would be limited. So it's something that we definitely favor. The USTA got talking again seriously about medication compacts when HR 2651 hit the horizon. This is actually the second iteration of this particular thing. This time it includes both thoroughbreds and standardbreds. And
Just for edification, that's the same statute that Russell Jones was talking about.
yes,
Yeah, so people may not recognize the
federal anti-doping legislation. And I think that in our discussions at the USTA, we have taken a look at it, and some people have said, well, it probably isn't going to pass, it may never pass, and so on and so forth. I think you always have to take bills like that seriously. I know that the proponents of the bill have put a tremendous amount of money behind it already, and I'm sure they don't intend to walk away from that. So it's going to be there. We are, at the USDA, we're opposed to it unanimously. It would be a mistake in a number of different ways. If you have questions about why we think that, I'll be glad to answer them, but I wasn't asked to talk about that specifically. We believe that the Interstate Medication Compact should be pursued with or without the question of viability of the Anti-Doping Act, because it's good for racing. It's something that our members want and our customers want. So we would be in favor of an Interstate Medication Compact even without the federal legislation. We're having an executive committee meeting on the 13th of next month to decide how much of our time and resources to put into promoting. By the way, we have been lobbying against the Anti-Doping Act in DC already. The next decision will be what to put into promoting the medication compact. Mr. Foreman's excellent presentation, I think, did the rest of my work for me. I'll be glad to respond to any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Commissioner Bernheiser, did you have a question?
No, I do not. Okay. I just want a clarification because I'm a little confused. So you're saying that the legislation, I haven't seen the language, the legislation that we approved does not specifically say one delegate per? It does. It does? Oh, yeah. All right, so that, I don't know how we get to a contract that allowed, so you're saying it would be one, but they could vote different rules for different, but it still would be one?
Yes, if the compact provided for that.
I'm just thinking that I think if there were two, as someone mentioned, it would make the standardbreds feel that they have a representative who knows their industry there rather than someone they're hoping knows their industry. So, but you're indicating that's a problem because of the legislation that's already going forward.
I think it's that, and I think more importantly, I think that the commissioners who have voted to move forward, commissions are going to have to consider
We've
that
got to
issue.
give them a microphone because we have so many on there.
Separate and apart from the fact that everyone would have to go back and amend their current language that is now being introduced or being worked on, but I think even fundamentally, you'd have to get all the commissions together to discuss the issue as to whether or not you could even get the approval of the commissions to establish two delegates from each state.
So it would come down to then, in my opinion, that either they trust the person there to do both, or they say, we don't want to be a part of it. As you suggested, was also possible. So the standards are not part of the compact, just the thoroughbreds.
Can I make a comment? Sally, you're bringing this up. I actually hear the two representatives of both of the industry saying that it's not needed. You seem to be skeptical that one person can represent.
Well, I'm just thinking about
And I said
The Standardbreds, I think, are concerned about having someone vote on these issues that knows they're, I mean, I don't want to speak for them.
well, I guess you could say maybe the representative might be a Standardbred person.
That would be the safest way to go, I think.
Like,
And the other is that debate, it's, the delegate to the compact from this commission is going to get his or her direction from the commission. They're not going to make that decision unilaterally. And it seems to me, because I see it in other states, that that delegate is going to do what the industry wants them to do. And you've got, in New York, you've got a very strong Standardbred industry, a very strong Thoroughbred industry, and those interests are accommodated by one commission. And I think that the process will work that way. I'm happy to go back. I'm just a go-between here, to go back to the group and ask them if they want to change the language to provide for two delegates, one Thoroughbred, one Standardbred. I don't want to create a rift with anybody, Madeline, but it's not the way it was designed. And
I understand.
but I can't tell you that it was discussed either.
Any other questions now that we have them both at the table at the same time? Okay, have you two talked to each other about this before today?
I've known Russell for 30 years. We haven't interacted too much. I used to do a lot of Standardbred work. And he called me he actually emailed me last week, which led to a conversation about this, which I really appreciated from his perspective, because it was very helpful in getting that dialogue going.
Well, thank you both for coming here.
Thank you.
Alan, you will stay around for the other one.
Okay, we're gonna, is there any other
I've suggested that if we want to, we can either have a short executive session at the end of this to discuss the next steps on this, or we can wait till the next meeting. But given the timing that I hear that other people are moving forward, I think maybe it might be a suggestion to have a short executive session. I cannot do that. I have no. All right, I'm not going to be able to say this one. Okay, but I'm just concerned that we make some decisions about what staff should be doing. We can do it openly if you want to. I'm just suggesting that we at least take the steps of having staff draft legislation that we would have to do, and then we can decide in the next meeting what to do. My suggestion. Yes or no? I'm not suggesting that we automatically do it.
That's not unreasonable to try to have a document in front of us actually discussing the merits of moving forward.
I think actually Dr. Egloff would like to chime in as well, so I know he can't be here today, but I know he's got some input as well.
Well, I'm not suggesting we vote on it today.
I would like to, I would like to make a comment. Russell, I'd like to thank you for the excellent presentation. I guess, personally, I think I need more time to study this. I at this point can't see how one size fits all. And I don't know if there's a possibility that there could be two compacts established, one for Standardbreds and one for Thoroughbreds, because I know that the states that you mentioned predominantly are very heavily weighed in the Thoroughbred industry. So that, again, makes me think that I think Pennsylvania is probably, as far as Standardbreds, are one of the top states, along with, I think you mentioned New Jersey, and I don't know if you mentioned New York or not, but I guess I just need more time to think about this and hear the comments of our stakeholders before I express my feeling. And I'm sure Dr. Egloff also has some comments we'd like to express about it also. So I think we just need basically more time to consider this.
Okay, thank you. Go
I have
ahead.
a question, and with Russell and Alan, if I'm correct, I heard that this compact would not prevent breed-specific medication rules. Yeah, this compact as proposed would not prevent breed-specific medication rules.
Correct. The language of the compact specifically provides for breed-specific.
Yeah, so this compact provides for the ability to have breed-specific medication rules.
And all I'm suggesting is that we're not voting on it. Dr. Egloff and others will have a chance to come in and review it. I'm just suggesting that at least because of the timing of other jurisdictions that we at least look at what we would have to do. And more importantly, because of my other concern, how we would accomplish it. Do we do it by specific request for legislation rather than opening up and racing act? So I think we need to look at that too. So
We are fortunate to have our legislative consultants in the room with us here. Maybe we could have them at the table the next time we have this conversation, and we'll have talked about some of those things and have some better advice for you.
thank you.
Forewarned is forearmed.
Madam Chair, may I approach the bench?
Sure, Bob.
My name is Bob Reber. I'm General Counsel for the Pennsylvania Hornets Horsemen's Association. Many of you know me. I've been in the industry for 40 years, both on the Thoroughbred as well as the Standardbred side. I spent 18 years in the legislature from 1980 till 1998. Was very much involved in virtually all the horse racing amendments and legislation at that time. From that particular standpoint, I make some of these comments. I think the process should be rather deliberative, more so than it appears to be moving. And I say that to give the commission the opportunity to do what the legislature would do in a situation like this. If it goes to the legislature, it's going to be introduced by someone, if someone desires to introduce it in the first place. It's going to go through a hearing process in committee. It's going to go to the floor of the House, eventually if it gets out of committee, and be debated there. A lot of things will go on, and the reason why they do that is to have a full understanding, and I think that's what Commissioner Brennheiser was talking about. I know a number of the other commissioners have made comments that are in that same vein of concern for what we're talking about. And I think before we rush to do anything, we should take a look at exactly what are the alternatives to take care of the concerns that we've heard today. I think Commissioner DeBund is absolutely correct that there really probably ought to be 2 delegates if you're going to go in that direction. I understand the problematic that brings about, but that can be solved too by the 2 commission concept that Commissioner Brennheiser just talked about, where you have a Standardbred compact commission, and you have the Thoroughbred. And that will not slow down those states that are already moving forward, because basically that would be the Thoroughbred side. To be quite honest, it's been promulgated by virtually Thoroughbred interests. I don't think USTA has taken a position on that, and not to demean or to denigrate or to dilute what has been done on that Thoroughbred aspect. I think it makes a lot of sense. Let me also say this. This was developed by CSG, is that correct? Council of State Governments People. I think that's what you said. That is much more of a regional type of organization. Has ALEC or NCSL, National Conference of State Legislators, or the American Legislative Exchange Conference been involved in this at all?
Rick Masters is the only one who's been involved.
That's what I thought. I think that's an organization too that you want to reach out to, and I think Deputy Secretary Cook understands where I'm coming from on that. And I know over on this side, these folks back here are certainly very much familiar with that. That would give a much better national flavor to have all the pieces been taken care of in this state. It's just a lot of those things that concern me individually, but more importantly, my client, the Standardbred folks, are very much concerned about this and the implications it might have depending on how the single delegate concept would play out and how it might be weighted. And more importantly, down the road, you don't know what kind of pressures are going to be brought upon the compact individuals in relationship to what's going on out there with the various anti-racing elements of the world. So I think you want to be very careful not to have Standardbreds targeted with some problem with strictly Thoroughbred, and vice versa. Thoroughbreds be targeted with something that's Standardbred. That could be solved much easier if there was this dual concept, if you will. So that's just something that we wanted to point out. And please, please do not want to rush to judgment on this. I think there needs to be discussions with our stakeholders and the commission, as this commission has so ably done on many occasions already on hot topical issues, to really vet this thing out a little bit more before the commission would even take a vote whether to advise and agree to have this sent over for a legislative consideration with your approval or without your approval. So I just pass that along from the perspective that I at least like to think I bring to the table, certainly with my clients, and pass along to you, which is their concerns very wholeheartedly on this issue at this time. Thank you.
I just wanted to, I agree with you. I just suggested something.
Great minds have always thought alike. Sure.
So you're an eagle supporter. I was just suggesting having something that we can look at to start the process.
Right.
I mean, that's all I was suggesting.
And anybody starts with a piece of paper with words on it.
Thank you. Sorry to take up time.
Any other comment or discussion before I turn this over to Brett for our administrative actions?
B, new business, we've got 3 items. The first being simulcast calendars for the 3 harness tracks, Harris, Mohegan Sun, and the Meadows. The second, the February simulcast calendars for Parks, Penn National, and Presque Isle. And C, the Meadows racetrack is adding 2 dates, August the 24th and the 18th, Virginia, the 17th and the 25th. Madam Chair, we have to request one motion for these 3 items.
So moved.
Dr. Singh, is there any? Commissioner Rogers, discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it.
And at this time, there's no ratifications.
And we'll move on to licensing and adjudications.
There are no matters for our commission.
Excuse me, Brett, this is Carol, Commissioner Brandon.
Yes.
Are we going to have a marketing report today?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay, good.
No licensing matters, adjudications?
Okay, we have 2 adjudications for consideration at today's meeting. The first is the appeal of Stephen Claceris, Hibiscus Stables. This is arising from the first race run on September 3rd of 2017 at Philadelphia Park, which was declared a dead heat. There was an appeal by Mr. Claceris. This commission, having reviewed the adjudication of the hearing officer, drafted by the hearing officer, and the findings of facts and conclusions of law contained therein, do I have a motion as follows? And now this 30th day of January 2018, upon consideration of the testimony and exhibits of record, it's ordered that the official result of the placing judges with regard to the first race on September 3, 2017 at Parks, finding it to be a dead heat, is affirmed. Do I have a motion?
Is there a second? Any discussion?
I guess Tom, and then Russell is the second.
All right, any discussion? Questions? Council? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Okay, the second adjudication for today is the appeal of Peter Generis. I hope I said that right. This was a medication-positive case involving methadone. This is arising from a test conducted on a horse named On His Honor Hanover, which ran in the first race at Harris on June 2nd of 2017 and ultimately tested positive for methadone. This commission has had a chance to review the hearing officer's adjudication and findings of fact and conclusions of law in a proposed order. And, give me a second here. Do I have a motion as follows? The order would read, and now this 30th day of January 2018, upon consideration of the testimony and exhibits of record, it is hereby ordered that ruling number 17089 CD, issued by the Harris Philadelphia Board of Judges on June 29, 2017, is affirmed. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Sweeney. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Reddy.
No. Oh, I'm sorry.
Simultaneous. I was looking that way.
Okay, got it.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right, and that's it for adjudications.
We've got a handout of the appeal numbers on the table today, Mr. Augusto.
Commissioners, very briefly, since last commission meeting before the Board of Judges, there is one medication matter before the Board of Stewards. There are 6 at Penn National and 2 at Philadelphia Park waiting. The bureaus have received a total of 5 appeals, 4 of which have been withdrawn or settled, There is one claiming dispute still on books. No matters were sent to the legal office to be scheduled this month. Hearings that have been scheduled but not yet conducted are a total of 6, most of them being medications. There are several continuances that have been granted to those matters. Hearings that have been conducted and are awaiting a hearing officer proposed report is 1. The 2 adjudications that we handled just today, and the rest of the matters are appeals in front of the Commonwealth Court, which are a total of 5. That's the Lorman, Rojas, Racing Gambit, Sarissa, and Zuleta matters, all in front of the Commonwealth Court. And 1 matter we are still awaiting a decision from the Federal District Court from Judge King. Those are the updated stats.
Questions? Thank you, counsel. Marketing report. Ashley? Report is eagerly awaited.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ashley Eisenbiel, the Marketing Director for the State Horse Racing Commission. And just going to briefly go over the farm show. This year the Commission had a booth at the 102nd PA Farm Show. This was a really great opportunity for us to get in front of a new audience and be able to speak to visitors from all over Pennsylvania. Our booth featured educational rack card, which I did put on each of your binders for you to take a look at. We also had a lot of great giveaways for all ages: pencils, bookmarkers, dry erase boards, the youth harness racing puzzle. We also had pens and things for order, but really wanted to focus on all the kids coming in on their field trips. We also had a lot of the stakeholders send me their brochures and educational handouts that we could give out for them as well. And also had a display of racing equipment for both harness and thoroughbreds. We also had a reel of videos going that was either our stakeholders' commercials or informational videos that they have done, along with some live races. In addition to having the booth that week, Jason Calvin, the Director of Enforcement, and myself did 2 30-minute presentations, so we were on stage for an hour at the Ag 101 stage. Our presentation was about thoroughbred breed versus standardbred, and also the 2 types of racing, and also the enforcement of racing for Pennsylvania. And it was a very interactive, kid-friendly throughout the entire presentation. We had a lot of fun with it. Got kids up on their feet, pretending they were trotters and pacers with us, dressing up as drivers and jockeys. So it was a really good experience for the audience as well as ourselves interacting. Along with that, on Monday, on the Education and Careers Day, we had Parks Hall of Fame jockey Tony Black join us, and he is a really great ambassador for the industry. It was a wonderful time speaking with the kids, and he brought a lot of equipment. And we even had the Farm Show Facebook team come over and ask us if we could do a live kind of, did you know about horse racing on their Facebook page, which was really nice to be able to put that out on social media that day. So I really look forward to next year at the Farm Show. I think this is a great opportunity, and I've already started working on how to better this platform for our racing and breeding industry. The marketing and research update. The Savvy group has completed their discovery meetings with each of the stakeholders and tracks. The goal for the discovery meetings was to better understand the Pennsylvania horse racing and breeding industry for them. Last Wednesday, the Savvy group launched their online survey. The survey went to 2 types of customer audiences: potential and also occasional. So those were focused on those 2 groups. As of yesterday, 900 people have completed the survey so far, and it will conclude at the end of this week. The next step with the research will be based off of the online survey results. The Savvy group will organize 2 focus groups in the east and west markets of the state, and both Standardbred and Thoroughbred industry, or Thoroughbred and harness racing. The final conclusion of the marketing research is due on February 28th, so I should be able to send it to you shortly after the next commission meeting, the results of all the research that we have conducted. The last thing I have to speak about is the scorecards. This month, the first set of quarterly scorecards were due from the stakeholders. So I have included with your binders a brief snapshot of the scorecards for each association and their associated track, along with the breeders. There may be some minor adjustments to this after completing our first set of scorecards. We're going to meet next week and see if there's any way we can make them better for ourselves when collecting the information. And collecting the data and analysis of it. Sorry, I apologize. If anybody would like the full set of the scorecards, please let me know and I'll be happy to email them to you.
Commissioner Brown, yes, I'd like to have one. I also would like to comment about your efforts to farm shed. I heard a lot of positive feedback and presentations and your exhibit. You and the marketing team did the farm shed. Most of these plans are being formulated over future events, as we heard about future events. I think we need to consider other events similar to this that could achieve the same result. I think you did a great job. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, and I do plan on trying to get to some more of these types of events to broaden the awareness of our industry.
There were a number of hands that went up behind you.
May I ask you a question first? Yeah. Okay. Actually, I was going to ask you the status of the RFP for the website, but I just want to say that there's been some discussion in executive session that may change how that process goes. So I won't ask that question, but I just want to alert you that you probably should have discussions with the two bureau directors about how that may proceed, because it may be a slight change on how that's handled. So I was going to ask you that question, but given what happened in executive session, we may be going in a slightly different direction. So I just wanted to alert you to the fact that we should probably have that discussion before the next steps. Tom, you want to add anything to that?
I think it's fair to say there's dialogue going on between other parties, and we've got some things to close off and some things to make sure we're on the same page. At that time, I think it'll be a clear indication of where we're going, and we'll be back not only to the advisory committee, but to the commission.
Okay, let me ask one more time for those of you who, why don't you just bring a bunch of copies to, instead of trying to take a list now of who wants it.
Are you talking about something beyond what I already have a copy of?
The full card?
I have the summary.
Yes, you have the summary. I can send it out to all the commissioners, and then the marketing advisory committee, I'll send it out to them. They just compiled it this morning, so.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
Don't do it.
All right, Brian, go ahead. Wait, okay.
Quick question.
You gotta come up and use the mic. Sorry.
Quick question on the marketing grants. Have they, the ones that are handed in, have they already been sent for signatures, or are all of them waiting, already waiting until you get them all before they're sent for signatures?
We are waiting for all of them before being sent to get signatures. So we should have all of them by the end of the day today.
Sure.
Anything else for Ashley? All right, thank you, Ashley.
Sure, may I interject here? This is not on the agenda, but I have some good news to announce, and I'd like to have Alan come up. I think some of you have heard of the match series, the Thoroughbred Championship. We are bringing that back. I was going to explain it, but I should really have the person who started it, if Alan would come up and explain to this commission quickly where that is going. This is basically involves all the Thoroughbred racetracks in Pennsylvania, along with Maryland, Delaware, New York, and New Jersey. So Alan, you should explain what it's all about, what's coming back, and how it works. And if you would just take, you have 3 or 4 minutes.
Sorry to prolong your meeting. But I'm really delighted to, we'll be announcing shortly the revival of the Mid-Atlantic Thoroughbred Championship Series, the Match Series, which ran for 5 years from 1997 through 2001. It was a very, very popular and widely acclaimed championship series, the only regional championship series of its kind in the United States in racing. The series is comprised of 5 divisions. This series, this revival, 5 divisions, 5 races in each division. The horsemen are running for bonus money of approximately $450,000. Money will be awarded to winners first, second, and third in each of the divisions. There will be an overall owner who wins the series and an overall trainer who wins the series. All the tracks in the region are participating. Parks, Presque Isle, Penn National, Monmouth Park, Delaware Park, Laurel, Pimlico, and Delaware Park. The racing offices and the management horsemen have all agreed to protect the races in the Match Series so that there will be regional cooperation. No track will run a race against a series race. So all the horses in the region that enter the series will move from track to track. The idea being to promote racing with larger fields, better racing, heightened interest, just as we did last time. The horses earn points, and owners and trainers earn points for each race they run in through the series. Highest point earners are the ones who win the series. We had the first website of its kind in the industry back when we first started the Match Series. We'll have a new website. It's a branded series. Most of the races are in the range of $75,000 up to $200,000. They're all stakes races. And the series ended in 2001 on a very good note, but there were problems in the region that prevented everyone getting back together. Things are good in the region right now, particularly from a regulatory standpoint, the things we're doing for the health and welfare of the horse. This is just the next step in marketing and promoting the industry regionally. And it wouldn't have happened without the cooperation of the tracks, the horsemen, all working together. Eric Johnston and Todd Mosteller, Mike Valesi, Sal DeBunda, Sam Elliott, Joe Wilson, Bill Fasey, John Mooney, Bessie Gruhl, Sal Sinatra, Georgianne Hale, David Richardson, Tim Keefe, Mike Musto, Dennis Drazen. All the leaders of the industry in the region are working collectively and cooperatively, and we think this is going to lead to more regional cooperation on many issues that I think will be for the benefit of the horsemen, the betting public, and the industry at large. So we're really excited about it. You'll see a rollout coming probably within the next week or 2.
I just want to add to that while all the tracks in Pennsylvania are participating, the last race or the final championship race for 2 of the 5 divisions will actually be in Pennsylvania. One at Parks and one at Presque Isle.
The series starts on Black-Eyed Susan Day at Pimlico on May the 18th, and it will culminate with the championship of the series at Presque Isle on September the 16th. We're going to do a pick 5. 4 of the races will run on Saturday the 15th, and then the championship at Presque Isle on the 16th. So it's a really nice little wager for the horsemen and for the betting public. Just because that's what it is.
And I would add that the purse money is being put up by the horsemen's groups, and the expenses of this are being put up by either the horsemen's groups or the actual tracks.
The tracks are putting up the
promotion of this. So this is a cooperative effort between the horsemen and the racetrack operators, and I think it will be a great thing for the Mid-Atlantic area. And Alan, I thank you for the time you put into this. Thank you. Thank you for the interruption.
Good news is always welcome. Turn it back over to Brett.
Industry report. reports, call upon Kim Hankins from the MSOA.
Well, unfortunately, there's been a instance of herpes EVH1 at the Meadows. We currently have 5 tested positive. All horses, 3 of them have been taken off grounds, and I was just informed earlier that the last 2 were quarantined in our ship-in barn. We have shut down racing till at least Wednesday of next week, and more than likely it will be for another week after that. We're currently using all the biosecurity possible. We are being guided by the Dr. Palm of the Bureau of Animal Health, and it's an unfortunate situation, and hopefully it doesn't happen to anybody else. It's a tough go right now, especially for our horsemen that have to go week by week for income. So keep us in your prayers.
I just want to inform you that we had a meeting with Dr. Wolfgang earlier today to bring us up to date on that, so we are aware of it.
Good. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Call upon Michael Belezzi of the PTHA. Okay. Jim Simpson, Standardbred Breeders.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank this commission for the timely release of the Breeders' Award money in Pennsylvania last year, and would appreciate the same effort. A lot of the breeders are paying bills and not receiving checks this time of year, and it means a lot to them, and thank you for your effort.
Thank you. On that note, everything's on schedule for the same as last year. I will say patience may be needed as we just had some change in personnel. If there's any hiccups, we do have Penny on speed down. Lastly, Brian Sanfratello.
On the first page of the handout you received is the final on the slide revenues into the Breeders' Fund. They were up this year over last year $3.3 million, which brought them to 18,178. Plus, if you add in the 2.2 million we received as 25% from the Act, brought it to a total of $20,407. I'm sorry, $407,000. Also, just one point here. Unique Bella bred by Brushwood Stable won the 2017 Eclipse Award for female sprinters. This is the second year in a row that a Pennsylvania bred has won that award for female sprinters. Last year was Finest City, bred by Hank Notoff. So again, fantastic, and we wish them great luck in the future. Any questions?
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Brett, may I interject a question to the members of the racing directors and the horsemen? Some months ago, we spoke about horse identification, and they were going to look into chips and other methods. We've gotten no further feedback. I know, Sam, you were not part of that. Mr. Wilson was, but Mike, I know you were. We've gotten no response from anyone about that and where that's going. So I would ask that you please come to the next meeting prepared to give an update on where that... Here's a microphone.
I met with Jim Gagliano, and right now we're working with the Jockey Club to provide the chips, and also with the cooperation of the Parks Racing. We intend to pursue that program.
Okay. I was informed today of something I did not know, Mr. Belezzi, that the chips can now be put in the mouth area rather than on the back, which means that they won't the lip, so that they will not, navigate as much as they went before. So I would point out to you, you may want to look into that possibility, because there's less room to navigate from there, and it was less of a problem.
We have a veterinarian who will participate, who will do all the chip work for us.
Right. So we really think that that's something that we need to move forward with, so that if you could give us a better report on where we stand with that, both with the racetrack point of view and from your point of view, I'd appreciate that for the next meeting.
Will do.
Okay, thank you. Moving along to public comment. Madam Chair, no one at this time is registered for public comment.
Okay. Well, in that case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion, go Eagles.
Motion to adjourn, go home.